how you took this more historic approach, because it also shows what one thing China is really good in, and this is my personal interest. So I'm interested in Chinese strategic planning, and I more and more become aware of how long-term Chinese planning is. So they plan in very long time frames, in opposition to at least the European Union. This is what I know best, but maybe possibly also if you compare it to the United States and what you just said about the Reagan regime. So what is your insight on the very long-term Chinese strategic plan? How would you compare it?
That's a very interesting question, Amy. And again, so I'll tell you a short story. When I was young, right out of college, I actually volunteered at a refugee resettlement in Hong Kong and in the Philippines. Yeah. And I remember not only were we teaching, we called them back then Indo-Chinese refugees, right? After the Vietnam War, a significant number of Cambodians, Laotians, and Vietnamese, including Hmong Highlanders, were displaced or immigrated, left the country, and were designed to immigrate to the U.S. But before they can immigrate to the U.S., there were resettlement that took care of their visas. They learn English as a second language, but we also taught American culture, if you could teach American culture. And I remember one of the things that's different between West and East is that, in the East, and as you know, in Asia, it has to do with the concept of time. And I think this is important because in Asia, we believe that time is cyclical. It's a circle, right? So it's very much based on, for example, if you're a farmer, you have the rainy season and the harvest season and all that. But the Western version of time is different. At least in America, it is different. And to me, it's a little stressful. Over here, time is linear. Yeah. And the way we usually explain time back then to refugees is that if you're on a platform train, waiting for the train, if that train passes and you miss it, that's it. You're screwed. You're late. And to me, that causes a lot of stress. Yeah. Whereas, and again, this is putting things very simply, time for Asians or the East is that, oh, well, okay, you know what? I missed that train. There's got to be another train behind it. I may have to wait a little longer, but that's okay, right? And so I think this is reflected, this kind of concept in time in the two cultures are really reflected in how they design policies and how they design systems, right? So, for example, here, from a business standpoint, especially if you're a public company, your business performance is really measured in quarters, right? With your stock performance, your stock price performance. And I think that's pretty aggressive. I think it causes a lot of stress, for everyone, puts a lot of pressure on the CEO. But I think China is playing the long game. For the longest time, it is commonly known, China is referred to as the sleeping dragon, right? Meaning it has a lot of potential, but it's taking its time when things are right to actually wake up. And now it's starting to wake up. And it's going to be interesting in the next, 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, also what you said, this focus on quarterly results, for example, we know also from other experience or from other topics that it can also be really harmful. If you look, for example, at sustainability, we know that many companies in the last decades tried to get good quarterly results by neglecting sustainability questions or questions of renewable energies or things like that, because it didn't fit their profit model and because they were not playing the long game. And we see that now in China, even though there are lots of problems still in this realm, that they are focused on achieving a very long-term sustainable development, whatever they perceive as sustainable, right? So the goal can be different, but what I find very interesting for the Chinese model is what you say, this circular but very long-term thinking. It's not like linear, we have to achieve something now and then it's gone forever. Like we want to achieve it, but in a sustainable way for all of the population. And so we just take our time, but we have these long-term plans, right? So if you look at the whole Chinese strategic planning, you have lots of plans that are measured in centuries, right? Or in 50 years, or in 30 years, something like that, which is virtually inexistent in the EU, I guess, in the US as well, right?
Right. Yeah. And, and it is very interesting because the whole concept of time subconsciously is the basis for how we design our systems, right?
Mm.
So over here, because of quarterly stock performance, sometimes, especially, both traditional companies and startup, and I've worked with a lot of startups, that becomes the dominant, primary objective at the expense of everything.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to look good on the books. Your earnings call has to be good news all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes that forces, companies and CEOs to either one, I remember in the 80s, when I was working with Accenture, we were working on outsourcing models for US companies,
Yeah.
which basically means let's outsource everything to China.
Yeah.
Right? Why? To save cost. But the downside of that, and again, here in the US, I think, if I were to be critical, there's really, I think, a little bit of overemphasis on cost cutting, till the end, So in the 80s, a lot of jobs were lost, not just in manufacturing, but even professional services, because the idea is it's globalization is here. Let's source all these things out, to other countries where it's cheaper.
Yeah. Exactly.
Excuse me.
No problem.
But yeah, so, but the downside of that is what companies realize is that by outsourcing, especially engineering, they've lost access to their IPs. And now they're saying, oh my God, everything is copying our products. Everyone is copying our products. That Gucci bag, was manufactured. We outsourced that to China, and now it's in Chinatown in New York, which is a knockout. So and again, that's probably the idea of very short-term thinking. Let's just cut costs no matter what, as opposed to kind of a mindful way to really run a business. And again, I don't think that, what's interesting too is between the two countries, for example, right? So here we're talking about market capitalism, driven by the market, Adam's invisible hand, whatever. But in China, obviously, the capitalism is a different version. I guess it's called state capitalism, right? So based on those two things, it's really different how businesses are run. So number one, for example, in China, if you're a founder or a CEO, not only are you responsible for market dynamics, but you have to relate with the state, as well. You have to maintain good relations to get permits, funding sometimes. But if you're a CEO and founder in the US, you don't want to have to do anything with state government, local government, even the federal government. In fact, here it's like, get this government out of my way. Yeah. Right? So very different. And this is why, I guess, in terms of, also in terms of development, right? So, for example, in New York City, we have a subway that's 100 years old, or maybe 150 years old. Okay, cool. And now it's city run, right? It's run by the city. But did you know that when it started, it was a conglomerate of private subway companies? Okay, no. Do you know how long it took to consolidate all these private companies into a city run? 36 years. Okay. 36 years. Okay. Do you know how long it took for China to build a bullet train?
Which one?
I don't know, 10 years? I mean, Japan has had a bullet train for a while. It's been known for its bullet trains. But in less than 10 years, China built a bullet train. And what I've heard is that, the length of its, the distance that it travels is way longer than any other rail in the world. Yeah. And why is that? Because it's government backed. If the government wants it to happen, it just makes it happen. Here you have, if you want to build anything, of course you have, and you're a private company, you have to then deal with the government, deal with private owners of land that will, you have to buy all that property. So, it's very different, right?
Yeah. Yeah.